Evin know, and I'll be speaking on the topic of marijuana. To give some background, I want to present a quote from a scientific networking site called LabRoots. It aims to educate readers on topics like neuroscience, genetics, and marijuana studies. The quote is, "Marijuana was actually used among the social elite as far back as the 1840s. The word marijuana hadn't been coined yet. It was referred to as cannabis at the time. However, during the 1900s, the social status of the drug dropped a lot. It was used as a way to further harass Mexican and African Americans as a wave of Mexican immigrants headed north following the Mexican Revolution. With this change also came the word marijuana, to mean cannabis to white America. Marijuana is simply the word for the plant in Spanish, yet changing its name from Latin cannabis to the Spanish word marijuana helped the connection stick." This quote brings up the unfortunate stigma that cannabis is a bad thing. There is much debate on whether or not marijuana is good or bad. I will claim that cannabis usage brings a positive effect on the United States. To support my claim, I will explain how cannabis is good in the medical and economic aspects of the United States. My first major claim is that cannabis usage helps aid Americans with epilepsy illnesses. Aiding Americans who have seizures improves their daily lives, whether it be from like falling, head injuries, and whatnot. I'll bring up two scientific and medical studies to support my claim. The first study was on patients who have Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. This syndrome is a severe form of epilepsy, mostly in youth ages. The study conducted required all of its test subjects to have at least 2 drop seizures as a weekly side effect of their illness. This test concluded that with the constant and persistent dosage of CBD oils to stop and reduce seizures. If you guys don't know, CBD oil is an extract from cannabis. The test concluded that 58% of test subjects found that they experienced 50% less drop seizures during a week. To scale up the study, imagine helping half of all Lennox-Gastaut syndrome patients of the U.S. reducing half of their seizures, half of their seizure rates. The second supporting claim to this is through another study, but with patients with Dravet syndrome. According to the DravetSyndrome.org, it is estimated for every 21,000 people, one person will be diagnosed with it. All patients that were studied had to be experiencing a minimum of 4 compulsive drop seizures per month. Like the Lennox syndrome, the study reveals that the results saw half of the patients experiencing a drop of consistent seizures by 50%. To add, the same results were concluded by 2 or more open label studies. 50% of seizures experiencing patients saw 50 to even 80% drop in monthly seizure rates. Though these studies seem to portray the same redundant results, it is important that we look at the wider view. With the usage of cannabis, we can help half of our major seizure illness patients in America. My second major claim is that cannabis is creating new jobs in many different industries in the U.S. According to Forbes magazine and ArcView market research, it is recorded that the edible market alone grew to $100 million in 2016. For those unfamiliar with cannabis edibles, they are food infused with cannabis to administer the same effects as smoking it. These edibles can be used for either recreational or medical purposes. This boosts the food industry immensely. This creates new jobs in every aspect of the edible production, whether it be from food development, packaging, shipment, or the sales companies. Furthermore, the tech industry saw a growth as well, as many entrepreneurs began to create cannabis e-commerce pathways. More app developers are creating apps for mobile devices to locate medical facilities and receive deliveries relating to cannabis users. This boom in industries directly improved the U.S. economy. I will use Colorado's tax revenue as an example. Colorado has seen tax revenue spiking 266% from 2014, which is also the year they decided to legalize marijuana. This information was sourced directly from the Colorado official state web portal. None of these statistical improvements in our economy would be present if we did not have cannabis usage. As I conclude this speech, I want to remind you of my proposition. Cannabis usage brings a positive effect on the United States, from helping diagnosed epilepsy patients to improving their economy as a whole. Thank you.
Evan, the proposition was clearly stated at the beginning. We know what your subject is. The background information on the historical prohibition of marijuana seems to me like it's not as relevant to the arguments that you're talking about as something else might have been, and it might have been a more useful way of going at this. That's the usual kind of attack on the old school thinking that doesn't necessarily directly connect to the two claims that you're dealing with, which are the benefits medically and the potential new jobs. So I think maybe something else would have worked maybe a little bit stronger in setting up a context. There's not really a preview of what the supporting structure is going to be, so that's a little bit of a problem. But each of the secondary points are clearly identified. Although your first one sounds like it's mostly informational, talking about how it can be applied to these particular things. You want a declarative sentence there, and it's not hard to come up with a declarative sentence for this particular point, that it is effective in addressing the kinds of seizures that you're talking about. That's basically the claim that you need to be making. You've got two studies that you cite here. Both of them are explained pretty well. They've got statistical results that are almost exactly the same. The difference between the two kinds of seizures that we're talking about are never really explained. I don't know how important that's going to be. I do, however, think that you do have a little bit of an issue here, because if it's only 1 in 21,000 people who is subjected to the one type of seizure, and we don't know what the number is for the other type of seizure, that suggests that this is a fairly narrow beneficiary group compared to whatever potential negative consequences there might be. And we don't get any discussion of whether or not there are negative consequences. And so when you're saying it has a positive effect on the U.S., I think if you argued it has positive effects, but not a positive effect. This sounds like a grammar lesson. You know, a positive effect seems to imply an unbalanced effect, as opposed to identifying some positive effects. I think that would be a little bit clearer. On your second point, the food industry issue is okay. It's a $100 million market that you're talking about. You know, I wouldn't turn down $100 million, but when it comes to the total economy, and especially the food industry, $100 million is probably a relatively small portion of the business cycle. So how important it is a little bit hard to measure here. That'll be something that I'm sure the refutation speaker will be talking about. And then on the government revenues, you mentioned that Colorado had a spike in their tax returns on this. I think your statistic talks about a spike in the tax returns on marijuana sales and taxes, not on the whole state's tax revenue. So we still don't get a hard and fast number on it. We just have a comparative statistic, which is a useful piece of information, but I don't know how important that is to the state of Colorado's total budget. So its impact is a little bit hard to measure. There's a lot of reading in the presentation, but you do speak in a steady tone, and you sound confident and knowledgeable about what you're talking about. I just think you want to increase your credibility through your ethos by engaging us a little bit more. All right, thank you.